At the dawn of the 20th century, naval thinking was shifting. The once popular concept of combining heavy guns with a rapid hail of fire from intermediate weapons was steadily losing support. In the United States, however, this transition produced one of the most unusual battleship designs ever attempted. American designers installed pairs of 8-inch guns directly on top of 12-inch main turrets, a configuration that proved deeply flawed. While the design caused numerous problems, the blame did not rest entirely with the shipbuilders. At the time, the United States Congress was attempting to modernize the Navy while simultaneously minimizing costs. Lawmakers imposed strict financial limits and even dictated ship size, effectively forcing political priorities into naval architecture. These constraints severely weakened the combat effectiveness of American battleships during this period. Ironically, the United States Navy had developed plans for an all-big gun battleship before Britain, yet was unable to construct the South Carolina and her sister ship, Michigan, before Britain launched HMS Dreadnought. Worse still, Congress restricted these new ships to the same displacement as the older Connecticut-class pre-dreadnoughts they replaced, rather than allowing the growth seen in foreign designs. As a result, the ships were underpowered. Their top speed barely exceeded 18 knots, and they relied on outdated triple-expansion engines instead of modern steam turbines. While this appeared to be only a 3-knot disadvantage on paper, in practice they were closer to 5 knots slower over long distances. Any fleet sailing with them would be slowed down, creating a serious tactical liability. The ships also carried tall cage masts built from lattice frameworks. These were intended to allow enemy shells to pass through with minimal damage, preserving fire control systems. In reality, the masts flexed dangerously in heavy seas, degrading accuracy. One mast aboard Michigan even collapsed during a storm, killing several sailors. To save weight, designers lowered the forward deck by one level. This made the bow vulnerable to waves, frequently flooding the forward turrets during rough weather or high-speed movement. Despite these flaws, the ships had notable strengths. They carried some of the thickest armor belts of any first-generation dreadnought. More importantly, they introduced superfiring turrets, an arrangement where one turret sits higher behind another, allowing both to fire forward or aft. With 4 twin 12-inch turrets placed along the centerline, the ships could fire all 8 guns on either broadside. This was remarkably efficient. British battleships required 10 guns to achieve the same broadside, while German and Japanese designs needed 12. Using fewer guns allowed the South Carolina class to retain heavy armor within their limited displacement. Most of the earlier compromises stem from squeezing everything into a 16,000-ton hull. Yet the super-firing turret layout proved revolutionary. Nearly all later battleships adopted this configuration. Like HMS Dreadnought, these ships also carried 3-inch secondary guns for defense against torpedo boats, service of the battleship South Carolina in the Caribbean in the First World War. On January 6, 1913, orders were received to head south. The destination was the city of Colón, Panama, guarding the Atlantic entrance to the recently completed Panama Canal, a marvel of modern engineering and a symbol of growing American naval reach. From Panama, South Carolina moved into warmer waters, joining fleet maneuvers off Guantanamo Bay. After weeks of drills and coordinated operations, she turned north and returned to Norfolk, arriving on 22nd March. The respite was brief. Soon afterward, the ship resumed cruising along the eastern coastline of the United States, a visible reminder of American naval power. At the end of May, she entered New York Harbor, anchoring there from 28th to 31st May. While docked, her crew took part in ceremonies dedicating the United States ship Maine National Monument, honoring sailors lost in an earlier era. In June, the battleship assumed a different role, briefly carrying midshipmen from the United States Naval Academy, giving future officers first-hand experience at sea. By the end of the month, however, global instability again dictated her course. Sailing for Mexico, South Carolina patrolled waters off Tampico in Veracruz, where revolution threatened American lives and property during the Mexican Civil War. Her presence served as a warning and a safeguard. When the mission concluded, she returned to Norfolk in September, entering a prolonged overhaul that lasted until January 1914. With repairs complete, South Carolina rejoined the fleet for training exercises near Culebra Island. But peace proved fragile in the Caribbean. On 28 January, she dispatched a detachment of United States Marines to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, tasked with protecting the American embassy amid violent unrest. The landing force also established a radio station, securing vital communications during the crisis. Only after tensions eased, following the election of President Orestes Zamor, did the ship depart, leaving the city on April 14th. After taking on coal at Key West, South Carolina, sailed again for Veracruz, this time participating in the United States occupation of the city. When she departed in July, her duties shifted to sustained patrols off Haiti and the Dominican Republic, monitoring political turbulence that threatened regional stability. She finally returned to Norfolk on the 24th of September as war engulfed Europe. Though World War I had begun, the United States still stood apart, officially neutral. That neutrality did not last forever. Before the storm reached American shores, South Carolina underwent yet another overhaul, arriving in Philadelphia on October 14th and remaining there until February 20th, 1915. She then steamed south to Cuba, resuming peacetime training operations. Yet global tension was mounting. The sinking of the passenger liner Royal Mail ship Lusitania by a German submarine strained relations between the United States and Germany, bringing the two nations perilously close to war. For the next 2 years, South Carolina followed a familiar rhythm: winter training near Cuba, summer maneuvers off Newport, and year's-end maintenance in Philadelphia. That routine ended abruptly on the 6th of April, 1917, when the United States declared war on Germany following the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. From that moment forward, the Atlantic became a combat zone. Through August 1918, South Carolina patrolled the eastern seaboard. Then in September, she and other aging pre-dreadnought battleships of the Atlantic Fleet took on a new and dangerous role, escorting troop convoys across the submarine-infested Atlantic. On the 6th of September, she departed alongside Kansas and New Hampshire, guarding a fast HX troop convoy bound for France. After escorting the transports partway, the battleships detached on the 16th of September and began the return journey. The following day, disaster struck. South Carolina lost her starboard propeller, crippling her speed and forcing her to limp along at 11 knots, or roughly 20 kilometers per hour. Worse followed on September 20th, when a throttle valve failure shut down the port engine. Temporary repairs allowed movement, but violent vibrations soon forced the ship to halt completely for 6 tense hours while the crew worked to restore propulsion. 4 days later, the damaged vessels reached American waters. South Carolina headed straight for Philadelphia, where she underwent urgent repairs. Once restored, she returned to duty, resuming gunnery training as the war ground toward its conclusion. On November 11, 1918, the guns finally fell silent with the signing of the armistice, ending the fighting in Europe. Peace brought new responsibilities. In mid-February 1919, South Carolina began the first of 4 transatlantic voyages to Brest, France, carrying American soldiers home from the battlefields of Europe. By the end of the final voyage in late July, more than 4,000 troops had passed across her decks on their journey home. Afterwards, she entered the Norfolk Navy Yard for an extended overhaul. In June 1920, the battleship took on midshipmen once more, this time for an ambitious training cruise to the Pacific Ocean. Passing through the Panama Canal, she sailed onward to Hawaii, then visited Seattle, San Francisco, and San Diego. Departing the West Coast on August 11th, she returned to Annapolis on September 2nd, where the midshipmen disembarked. She then returned to Philadelphia, remaining there for 7 months. Early 1921 saw South Carolina back at sea for training near Culebra Island and in Chesapeake Bay. On 29 May, she embarked on her final midshipman cruise, crossing the Atlantic to Europe, with port calls at Christiania, Norway, and Lisbon, Portugal. She returned to Annapolis via Guantanamo Bay on August 30th, then sailed for Philadelphia once more. In the aftermath of the Great War, the world's major naval powers, the United States, Great Britain, and Japan, began constructing massive new fleets. Recognizing the danger of another arms race, they gathered at the Washington Naval Conference, which produced the Washington Naval Treaty in February 1922. Under its terms, South Carolina and her sister ship Michigan were deemed surplus to requirements. The battleship was decommissioned on the 15th of December, though her name lingered on the Naval Vessel Register until the 10th of November, 1923. On 24 April 1924, she was sold for scrap. Piece by piece, the ship that had sailed through revolution, war, and global transformation was dismantled. Her steel silent, her long service brought to an end. While dreadnought gave its name to an entire era, South Carolina left a quieter but lasting legacy. Her gun layout became the blueprint for future capital ships, influencing legendary battleships such as Warspite, Hood, Bismarck, Nagato, and Washington. Superfiring turrets, whether in twin, triple, or quadruple mounts, became the standard across nearly every battleship that followed.